Hello, this is a presentation on fluid compartments of the body, including major ionic compositions. This is Arlene Perez from the College of Science, Grand Canyon University, Human Physiology 2. The water found in the human body can be divided into compartments. These compartments can be divided into two major categories, the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid. In this presentation, we will dive into fluid compartments of the body. The human body is made up mostly of water. It is a major component for sustaining life. Human cells are made mostly of water found in their cytoplasm. Water is also important for extracellular communication and transport of molecules in the body. In biochemical reactions, water is important for hydrolysis, as well as the physical properties of water, like surface tension in the alveoli of the lungs. The water content in a person can range from 40 to 60% of body weight. The amount of water content is fairly consistent in individuals due to the efficiency of the kidneys in regulating water, but the percent of water can vary in each individual. The fat content in individuals can make the percent of water vary. Plasma is made up of mostly 90% of water. The soft tissues of the body, such as skin, muscles, and internal organs, contain about 70 to 80% of water. The bones tend to be more dry, with about 22% of water. Fat, though, is the driest of all water tissues, with only 10% of water, so someone with low body fat would have a higher water percentage than that of someone who had more fat, which is why the water percentage of individuals can vary. If we figure the total body water is around 60% of the body weight, then about 2/3 or 40% is from intracellular fluid. The extracellular fluid makes up the other 1/3 or 20%. This is known as the 60-40-20 rule. The renal and neurological endocrine system regulates water. The regulation of water is very important in maintaining homeostasis. It can affect the blood pressure and cardiac output. Hormones such as antidiuretic hormones ADH, renin, angiotensin II, aldosterone, and atrial natriuretic peptide ANP are the main regulators. The hormones send messages to the kidneys and the hypothalamus, but the lungs and the heart are also part of the secretion of some hormones like angiotensin converting enzyme, ACE, and ANP. Different clinical measurements are used to determine body water. A calculation based on body weight and urine output is one way, but it may not be very reliable. Another way to measure body weight is with dilution and equilibration utilizing a mass spectrometer that measures water abundance in respiratory samples of individuals. One way to calculate a person's hydration is with a bioelectrical impedance analysis that can be used by measuring the opposition to flow of an electric current through the body tissue. Because water is an electric conductor, someone who has low hydration level will have a greater resistance to electrical flow than someone with a higher hydration level. Body fluids are divided into two main compartments, intracellular fluid volume and extracellular fluid volume. There are 42 liters of water found in the human body, with 2/3 found in the intracellular fluid space, equaling 28 liters. The extracellular fluid volume is made up of two areas, the interstitial fluid volume and the plasma volume. The total amount of water in the human body is made up of the extracellular fluid. This is about 14 liters. 75% or 10 liters of volume is from the interstitial space, where 25% of that water is in the plasma. This is about 4 liters. Each of these areas work together with different functions necessary for physiological functions. The intracellular fluid is made up of the cytosol, or intracellular fluid, cytoplasm. These are found inside the cell. They are separated by membranes found around the organelles of the cell. The cytosol is made up of a complex mixture of substances that are dissolved in the water. The main component of cytosol is water, and it functions as a fluid medium so that it can send extracellular signals within the cell. It also helps in determining the shape and size of the cell. Ionic concentrations like sodium and potassium tend to be lower in the cytosol than that of the extracellular fluid. This is important for osmoregulations. It also has many macromolecules, and it can determine how they act through macromolecule crowding. The intracellular fluid makes up 60% of the total amount of water in the human body. It is pretty secure since the amount of water is very regulated in the cell. If the amount of water in a cell becomes too low, the cytosol becomes very concentrated with solutes, making it difficult to do normal cellular functions. If there is too much water in the cell can actually burst and be destroyed. Extracellular fluid are fluids that surround all cells in the body. There are two main components: plasma, which is the liquid part of blood, and interstitial fluid is the fluid that surrounds the cells that are not blood. Plasma makes up 20% of the extracellular fluid. Plasma moves through the body in blood vessels and carries lots of materials like blood cells, proteins, electrolytes, nutrients, gases, and waste. Gases, nutrients, and waste materials move between capillaries and the cell through the interstitial fluid. A selective permeable cell membrane separates the cells from the interstitial fluid. This controls the movement of materials between the interstitial fluid and inside the cell. Other extracellular fluids are cerebrospinal fluids, which coats the brain and spinal cord, lymph, synovial fluids of joints, pleural fluids found in the pleural cavity, pericardial fluids in the cardiac sacs, peritoneal fluid in the peritoneal cavity, and aqueous fluid in the eye. Since these fluids are found outside of the cell, they too are considered parts of the extracellular compartment. The main cation in body fluids are sodium, potassium, and magnesium. The main anions are chloride, organic phosphates such as adenosine triphosphate, adenosine diphosphate, adenosine monophosphate, bicarbonate, and proteins. The amount of ions are different in intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid. The ionic composition between plasma is almost equal to the ionic composition of the interstitial fluid. The reason is that the blood capillary membrane is highly permeable for ions, but the protein concentration in plasma is higher than the interstitial fluid. Also, the interstitial fluid travels through the capillary membranes, and they have a lower permeability for proteins. Plasma membrane and interstitial fluid have large, almost equal amounts of sodium and chloride. Interstitial fluids also have a large amount of bicarbonate, which is a negative ion, but is less than the amount of sodium and chloride. Cell membranes around the cell work as guards for the cell and separate the intracellular fluid from the extracellular compartments, and doesn't allow the ions of the extracellular fluid to move into the cell. So if you compare the cell membrane to the capillary membrane of the electrolytes, the electrolytes of the body cannot cross the cell membrane to go inside the cell. So it's a protection mechanism for the cell. The cell membrane, however, will allow water to move inside the cell and outside the cell, but most ions are not allowed to move inside the cell or outside the cell. Most body fluid ions tend to have a neutral charge or balanced. Even though sodium and potassium ions can flow through the pores into the cell, the higher level of potassium and lower levels of sodium ions in the intracellular fluid are regulated by the sodium-potassium pump in the cell membrane. These pumps do need ATP to provide energy for sodium to be pumped out of the cell and potassium ions into the cell. Hydrostatic pressure is a force used by fluids against a wall to move fluid between compartments. The pressure of blood is due to the pressure created by blood against the walls of the blood vessels as the heart pumps. Hydrostatic pressure in capillaries is high pressure produced by circulating albumin at the front of the capillaries. It forces the plasma and the nutrients out of the capillaries to the neighboring tissue. Fluids and cell waste in the tissues go into the capillaries at the venial end where less hydrostatic pressure is present. A filter pressure squeezes the fluid from the plasma to the interstitial fluid around the tissue cell. The remaining fluid in the interstitial area that does not go back to the capillaries is spilled over tissue through the lymphatic system, then goes back to the vascular system through the subclavian veins. Osmotic gradient is another way that fluid moves through compartments. The different concentrations create the osmotic gradient by the solutes on either side of the semipermeable membrane. The volume of the osmotic gradient is comparable to the concentration difference of solutes on either side of the cell membrane. Osmosis works by moving water from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. The water in the body moves by osmosis from plasma to interstitial fluid and from interstitial fluid to the intercellular fluid, and vice versa. Water is constantly moving in and out of fluid compartments as changes occur in the body. Some solutes move between compartments through active transport. Active transport utilizes energy in the form of ATP, so that cells can move a substance against a concentration gradient. Protein movement requires energy to move through the membrane. As mentioned earlier, the sodium-potassium pump also requires active transport since it is moving both substances against the concentration gradient. Passive transport of molecules or ions is dependent on the ability to move through the membrane. Diffusion of certain molecules and ions move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Some molecules, like gases, lipids, and water, can move easily through the cell membrane. Other molecules, like polar molecules, glucose, amino acids, and ions, will need assistance from a facilitated transport, where the molecule will move through the concentration gradient in a specific protein channel in the membrane. It does not require energy to use a facilitated transport, since it too moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. The body needs water to properly function. In healthy individuals, the body can balance the water that enters and leaves the body. Imbalances of fluid can happen when one loses more water or fluid than the body can take in. It can also happen when the body takes in more water or fluid than the body can get out. The loss of water can occur when one breathes, sweats, and urinates. If the proper amount of water is not being ingested, one can become dehydrated. In some cases, the body may have a difficult time releasing body fluid. This can cause the body fluid to build up in the body. This is called fluid overload, and it can lead to edema, which is an excess of fluid in the skin and tissue. Medical problems can cause fluid imbalances. Post-surgery, the body can retain large amount of fluids, causing the body swelling. Some people with heart failure can have fluid collect in the lungs, liver, blood vessels, and body tissue because the heart is not properly pumping blood into the kidneys. Another cause of body fluid buildup can occur when the kidneys are not properly functioning. The body cannot get rid of the fluid or fluid waste. This can be due to kidney disease. Loss of water can occur when too much fluid is leaving the body. This can occur with diarrhea, vomiting, severe blood loss, or high fever. Antidiuretic hormone can also cause loss of fluid. A lack of this hormone can cause the kidneys to release too much water, resulting in extreme thirst, dehydration, and chemical imbalances of the blood. Treatment of fluid balance disorders will depend on the cause of the fluid imbalance. In conclusion, the human body is made up mostly of water. The water found in the human body can be divided into two main compartments, intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid. The total body water is around 60% of the body weight and about 40% from intracellular fluid and 20% from extracellular fluid. This is known as the 60-40-20 rule. The renal and neurological endocrine system regulates water. The regulation of water is very important in maintaining homeostasis. Body fluid is divided into intracellular fluid. The fluid is made up of the cytosol of the cells. It is separated by membranes found around the organelle of the cells. The extracellular fluid are fluids that surround all the cells in the body. There are two main components of the extracellular fluid. These are plasma and interstitial fluid. The main cation in the body are sodium, potassium, and magnesium. The main anions are chloride, organic phosphate, bicarbonate, and proteins. The amount of ions are different in the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid. Fluid in the body moves through hydrostatic pressure, which is the force used by fluids against the wall to move fluid between compartments. Hydrostatic pressure is important in moving water through the nephrons of the kidneys. Osmotic gradient is another way fluid moves through the body. Osmosis is the way that fluid in the body moves. Active transport and passive transport is another way for transport of water. Active transport is movement against the concentration gradient with the assistance of energy through the use of ATP. Passive transport moves with the concentration gradient from an area of high concentration to low concentration and does not use energy. Disorders of fluid balance can be due to the body releasing too much water or the body not being able to release enough water. Depending on the type of disorder is how it will be treated. Thank you very much for listening. The following slide are the references for this presentation.